My name is Mary Calvert, and I am in Friday Harbor, Washington, interviewing Gordon Steele on June the 16th, 2014, for the Atomic Heritage Foundation Manhattan Voices Project. Gordon?
My name is Gordon, and you would like me to spell my name?
Please spell your name for me.
It's Gordon, Gordon, Steele, Steele.
Thank you. The questions I'm going to ask you are about your time at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I'd like to start with, how did you first become involved on the Manhattan Project?
Well, it so happens when I was a senior student in chemistry at UC Berkeley, I ran into a friend who told me about this a project that he had just hired on to, and he said they were hiring, and it was about a nuclear material that would be a new energy, and he thought they were probably working on a bomb. That was telling me, he was told not to tell that, but students. So I went to the radiation lab and applied for a job, and I was interviewed there by a nice gentleman. His name was McKay, and they hired me.
Wonderful. At Berkeley, in the radiation lab and in your chemistry background, who did you work with? What Nobel laureate did you work with? Ernst Lawrence?
It was, I got the name here. I can't put my tongue on it. Lawrence, Dr. Lawrence. I reported to work in one of his labs in the physics building. He's the one that invented the cyclotron,
Yes. What was special about your background that made you a good candidate for working on the Manhattan Project?
Well, I was a chemistry student, and I was available, and I needed a job, part-time job.
Yes. What was your initial job on the project?
Well, they put me to work on tubuloid tetrachloride. Tubuloid was I learned was the secret name for uranium, and what I did was work with a group of lady students who were operating some vacuum distillation. It isn't a sublimation really of uranium tetrafluoride. I didn't know exactly why they needed the fluoride, but I was sort of ahead of that project. I was hired by a person who I got to know quite well, was Bob Schmidt. He apparently had been with the project for some time. I think he was a physicist.
You arrived at Oak Ridge with a friend.
Yes, I did. I had quite a time. I was hired early in the early spring, I think, or late winter on the project, and when I graduated in June, they wanted me to move to Oak Ridge. So they wanted me to fly, and I said, no, I want to drive. So after a little argument, they said, okay, but I have to take John Marfit with me. So he and I came across the nation together. We became great friends.
Your badge number at Oak Ridge was?
I think it was 120. It was 129.
Yes. How much were you told about the project when you were at Oak Ridge?
Well, before I got to Oak Ridge, I knew that what the uranium was for. Um, I, Bob Bob Schmidt and I became great friends, and so I knew by that time that we were working on a bomb, and that it involved tubuloy tetrafluoride. Tubuloy.
Did you have any role in the intelligence or the security part of Oak Ridge?
No, but I had been warned not to reveal information or discuss it off of the premises.
Did you come into contact with any people who were later known to be spies?
No, I did not. However, I did have the experience of having someone who had worked in for the project fired for talking in the hallway.
What were some of the serious challenges that you and your colleagues faced at Oak Ridge?
Challenges? I don't think I had anything that I would call challenges. I just used my knowledge as a chemist and did as well as I could with what they gave me, the work they gave me.
What kind of a work schedule did you have?
Well, it was, of course, an 8-hour-a-day job, but there were certainly times in which you had to put in a good deal more time than that.
What did you do in your spare time for entertainment?
Well, they would have dances on Saturday night. Since there were so many women there, it was a bit of a flurry. But of course, you're dating, and I had some interesting experiences with that, but a group of us finally got together and rented a house over at the lake, and we'd go there weekends. We'd go off island to buy booze or to go to dinner. You could just come and go. It wasn't any problem. Of course, the town had a gate that you had to go through, and you needed to have your badge and an ID.
Describe the housing that you lived in.
When I first got there, it was a dormitory. Nothing in it but beds and so on. The living, such as eating, was supplied by a restaurant run by local people. Got a little tired of greens.
Were you married at the time that you arrived at Oak Ridge?
No, I was single, and I ultimately had nice young lady that I wanted to marry, but decided not to marry until the war was over.
Were you confident that the Manhattan Project would succeed?
Well, I certainly was confident that we could turn out the uranium um, uh, um, the uranium-235, but I had very little. I had some knowledge, but I had very little knowledge of what was going on at the other end of the line in New Mexico.
Los Alamos.
Yeah, you got it.
Did you worry about Hitler coming up with a bomb before the United States?
Well, I don't think I'm not just sure that how much I knew about the Germans' progress, but if I had thought of it, I've been bothered with it. I'm certain that it would be a too difficult thing for them to pull off, considering the magnitude of the effort that the United States was making. I knew that they had tried to get heavy water from Norway, and that they had been foiled by the Norwegians who sunk it before they could get it to Germany. But that's not much. So I didn't worry very much about it. I was too busy with my own stuff.
Did your attitude with respect to your confidence in the success of the project change over the course of the time you worked on the project?
Not at all. I and my fellow men, just my friends, were run fast out, hard.
What role did patriotism and wanting to win the war play in motivating you and your colleagues?
Well, of course, we got a lot of feedback on the progress of the war, and those of us who knew what we were doing were very intent on getting the material to what I can't think of the name of the place there again.
Los Alamos?
Los Alamos, gosh. But we had some information coming back from the guys who in the know went there to do things, and some of the people from there came to Oak Ridge, and so we got some picture of what was going on there, and I heard about some of the problems and some of the solutions, but it was full out to get it done. I knew that once they dropped the bomb, the war would be very shortly over by then.
Were you aware of the planned invasion of the Japanese homeland?
Strange to say, that was a conversation piece. It wasn't classified or anything. And we used to talk about the destruction that would happened because of that, because, the Japanese would fight to the very last person. And so we knew the importance of the bomb, I think. And we're very much encouraged while you're talking about that part. We knew when the Trinity test was made and that it was successful.
Yes. You knew it had accomplished the goal.
Not yet, because you got to realize they just put a bunch of stuff together and set off the uranium, but to deliver it was another problem.
How did you feel about the decision to drop the bomb on Japan?
That's an interesting problem. Interesting point. My first feeling was, surely now is the end of the war. But when they dropped the second bomb, the plutonium bomb, I was very upset about that. Later on, I got the story, which came through just conversation, that after they dropped the first bomb, the civilian representative in Japan and the military representative in Japan got together with the emperor and trying to decide whether they should give up. And the civilian wanted to yield, but the military one did not, and it was up to the emperor to throw it one way or another, and he went with the army, and so their refuse to give up caused them to use the new polonium bomb, and I understood that, and so I accepted it better. But there was quite a wave of intelligentsia at Oak Ridge, just the physicists and chemists and got together and at the auditorium at the school and discussed the future of the uranium bomb.
How do you feel about your role in the Manhattan Project?
Well, it was pretty small, but somebody had to do it. And I knew it was historic, and I was grateful to be part of it. If it had not been that, then I and many of the people who were involved would have to go off to war. It's funny because they combed the armies for people with a technical background and brought them to Oak Ridge. They worked for the Army. They were paid and maintained by the Army, but they were working on the bomb.
Can you talk about any contact you had with General Groves or any of the other famous figures?
General Grove came. I worked in the R&D building at Oak Ridge, and we had some pretty interesting work going on there. And one day Groves came in, and I think Herb
Young?
Young. Herb Young joined them and took them for a look through the R&D facility. And of course, I knew him as soon as I saw him. He didn't stop and say hello or anything. And he had some of the leading physicists. Now, who they were, I didn't know, but they came down the hall, sweeping by, and they looked in at my stuff, and they looked in at some of the others too. And I think they were headed to Ed Wagner. Now, I haven't told you this before, but Ed Wagner had worked with me previously on the project at Davis, University of California, Davis. We had a group there, and Ed and I were both working on converting uranium oxide to uranium tetrafluoride, chloride, excuse me. And my process was not working out well and wasn't worth pursuing beyond keeping me employed with something. But Ed had developed a process for feeding the uranium powder into a glass tube that was rotating. And of course the whole system is all sealed up. And then surrounding the glass tube was a furnace, just about 18 inches long, and the powder of of uranium would be dropped in there at the same time that they were feeding carbon tetrachloride. Well, when these two things were together in the heated area, it would make uranium tetrachloride out of it. And I did some work with the same idea, but mine wasn't rotating. And what happened was that when it created the fluoride, it had a tendency to stick to the glass. So Ed came up with the idea with a tapper. So he built a tapper that just went like that, and the powder wouldn't stick, and it came out the end. I thought that was kind of a foolish thing to be working on, because there's no way you could make a lot of uranium tetrachloride that way. Uranium tetrachloride, of course, was the stuff that went into the calutron to separate. And, well, that's just a side thing. And now when we went to Oak Ridge, he was still working on this. Out in the back room, he had this tube, and he was trying to improve on that process. It never occurred to me that they could not make the uranium tetrafluoride, that precious stuff. You could not make it by the same process, which they were purifying the recycled uranium, because that went back to feed back into the chlorination process, was a liquid phase type.
Let's clarify. When you were working with Ed Wagner on this project, it was at UC Davis.
That's right. Yeah, we were there for months. They had a group there, and it was there, I think, that the person of which got fired because he was talking in the hallway, he was there too.
One more question about famous people, and then we'll go forward.
Okay, yeah.
You worked at Berkeley
Yes.
after you graduated
Uh-huh.
with,
Bob Schmidt.
yes, but tell me about the story with Ernest Lawrence.
Oh, well, what we were doing with Bob Schmidt's group was they would buy uranium fluoride as a chemical at that point because they had no way of making it, okay? So they put me in charge of that process where we were converting bought uranium fluoride into a vaporizable, controllable material. And so that was done by a vacuum sublimation of the material process that went on to the big to Oak Ridge. But they used that in the cyclotron converted to what was called the calutron. And so they needed that material up on the hill. So the cyclotron's operation was up on the hill by the football field. And so they needed some up there, and so I took it up. And as I was, it's just a walking distance because the football field's up there and not that far up, you know. So I was walking up, and this car came along, and the driver gave me a lift, and it was Lawrence, Dr. Lawrence. And we had a nice conversation, just student type, you know. That's the only time I saw him. He, of course, never went to Oak Ridge. He stayed back experimenting with the calutron.
Thank you very much for that. Now we'll start the second piece, Gordon, where you get to talk more and there are not so many structured questions.
Okay.
So let's start with wherever you wish at either Berkeley or Davis, but I may stop you to clarify which place this information's coming from.
Okay. I can start it at Berkeley.
You can start wherever you wish now.
Okay. This group that I went to work with at the physics building lab were girls. And so I was more or less running the process in my spare time because I was still a student there. That they were pretty much convinced that was the best kind of uranium tetrafluoride they could put in to manage what they needed for the calutron, which was the separation process developed from the cyclotron type.
Gordon, is it fluoride or chloride? Tetrachloride or fluoride?
Did I say fluoride?
You did. You meant,
it's chloride.
yes, thank you.
Now, fluoride comes into the story much later.
That's okay. We've clarified what it is.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. And so I got a ride up there with him. I had to walk back.
Yes. So you're talking about the girls in the lab at Berkeley?
Yeah. So they did all the work and I just overlooked it. So Bob and I were free to experiment with that process.
Bob Schmidt?
Yes, Bob Schmidt. On a larger scale. And so this material, uranium tetrachloride, is very hygroscopic. And when it reacts with the moisture in the air, it turns to an oxide and it lets off chlorine stuff and all that. And so we built a dry room there. And he also designed and had built a vacuum chamber in which we could uh, distill larger batches. It was a terrible thing, but they built a dry room and keep the room dry. They had a suit in there that you would put on and shove the end of the receiver in this distillation process, sublimation. And I say distillation, I mean sublimation. And that's, of course, where it leaves solid and it condenses the solid. Anyway, so we put this vacuum equipment next to the dry room. I had a hose on me, and I went in the dry room, and I'd take the uranium out of the vacuum system and put it in airtight containers. It was kind of it was just a trial to see if that was going to be the way they did it, really, in Oak Ridge. In Oak Ridge. And it was so clumsy, and I was the one that put the suit on and went into the room. Well, we did things like that, had very much with Bob and working with him and that stuff. But as soon as I graduated, of course, I went out of that job, and I don't know whether they even continued on, but my job there was just to keep me so they could ship me off to Oak Ridge.
Yes.
Because I really wasn't needed for there. They didn't need a graduate student to do that.
You went to UC Davis.
Yeah, I went to UC Davis, and we had a group there under Herb. Which was Herb? Yeah, Young. He was the head of the chemistry department at UC Davis, and UC Davis had more or less shut down. They had the Army there training classwork stuff for the Army. So we had the whole building to ourselves. It included the clubhouse for the staff, great pool table. Anyway, we had several people there working on various phases of the uranium problem. They're chemists. And Ed and I became good friends.
Ed Wagner.
Ed Wagner.
Let's fast forward to your returning to Berkeley, getting hired, interviewed and hired, your trip to Oak Ridge with John Morfitt, and then...
Well, I was hired once, and after that, I was in. The only thing is, while I was a student, I was part-time, and I was more or less kept. Anyway, when I came back from Davis, the Davis thing went on. I came back. And after I sat around for a couple of days, they finally told me what I was doing there. They were sending me to Tennessee, where they're setting up the process, the machines for this uranium work. And they wanted me to fly or take the train back. I told them no, I was going to take my car. And they said, well, you know, cars are cheaper on there than they are here. And I said, no, no, I'll take my car. So they finally said, okay, you can drive, but you have to take
John Morfitt.
John Morfitt with you, right?
Gordon, you arrived in Oak Ridge on April the 17th, 1943.
Isn't that great?
And your badge number was 129,
Yeah.
and John Morfitt's was 122.
It was?
Yes. So your first job at Oak Ridge
Yeah.
was what?
Well, that's interesting because they put me to work assembling the equipment that my friend Ed Wagner had developed at Davis. He was back there improving it and so on. But I was in the bottom of the chemistry building. Not a soul in that building except the construction people.
At Oak Ridge.
At Oak Ridge, 9210, no, something like that. And what was I doing? I was assembling these tubes that Ed had developed. It's a Pyrex tube about, I think about 3 feet long, with seals on the ends that had could permit them to rotate without leaking in or out. And so had all these tubes that I started to assemble. I never got to the point of putting them into a fixture or anything, just doing the tubes. And they sent me a girl, a lady to help me prepare these bearings and so on. But that was just getting ready for processing uranium. And I thought to myself, this is silly. This stuff just barely puts stuff out. It wasn't. And Ed kept working on it all the time we were in Oak Ridge, out in the back place on this process. Why is he doing that? Well, the reason why he was doing it, the reason why he was doing it is because they were going to use this to convert the uranium from the alpha process, the first time through the calutrons, to this is going to be precious output from that. They have to convert it to the uranium chloride, tetrachloride. And this was the perfect thing because it didn't have high production. There was not high production needed. And it was all neat and contained. There wasn't big sloppy bowls of chemical or anything. There were just little bits of stuff that would be the oxide, and you feed the uranium oxide in. And the uranium oxide was a 6-valent phase. The tetrachloride would not only chloride the uranium, but get rid of the gases. The gas coming off was a really dangerous material. One of the workmen got caught in some of that and killed him right there in that same building. But there I was trying to remember things. Well, I didn't have to remember. I knew exactly what to do with it. But that's what I was doing until the R&D building opened.
Which was September of 1943.
Yeah.
Gordon,
Well, I did other things besides that, I think.
I want you to tell me about the two projects you worked on that were directly related
Oh,
to
yeah.
uranium-235
Yeah.
and why they were important?
Excuse me, I'm fussing with that. Sorry.
It's okay.
The uranium that they were sending to Los Alamos was the oxide. And it was converted to the fluoride there.
To fluoride there, or chloride.
Fluoride.
Okay.
Okay. And so there wasn't any, there was no place in there that would tell them that there was not rare earths dragged along with the process. Because the rare earths would have the same chemistry as the uranium, and except the thing that they were they were worried about with the rare earths is that these elements have a very high neutron capture, so they would be like quenchers to the bomb, and rare earths are found with uranium in nature, the same kinds of deposits. So they needed some assurance that the stuff that they're shipping had no rare earths in it. And so they gave me the job of analyzing in some more or less clean way a small amount of the product that they were shipping to Los Alamos. So I worked out an analytical process where I could not only detect it, but determine how much was in there. It's just a chemical process, something clean, so you wouldn't go take a quart or something back after you got a few milligrams. I don't remember how much they gave me, but it was a very small amount.
And this, when you say product, is uranium-235.
Yes, the product was the oxide of uranium initially. They would convert it to the fluoride, and then they would reduce the fluoride with a molten metallic calcium, and that would create the uranium metal, and they could separate that from the product, calcium oxide. But later on, the fluoride process was taken over by Y12, and they shipped out the fluoride. Now, that they needed to know that there was no earth, they needed to know that,
Rare earths?
there was no rare earths in there. Okay. I'm getting that confused with another. I ran another analysis too, but that chemistry involved the natural uranium. That wasn't. And what I did was I took some uranium, I added rare earth to it. I set up in my laboratory the same purification process that they were using in production and I ran the material through. It was an interesting process because it was all liquid purification. They would take the oxides, what's that they would end up with from the chemical treatment of the cleaning of the collectors, the sump, and they would convert that to the oxide, and then the oxide would be converted to the fluoride. But rare earths would go through that process. They were afraid it would go through that process. So I duplicated their purification process, and I put in some rare earths with normal uranium and run it through there, and then that they could put in a they could spectroscopically analyze it and see if the rare earths were there. And so I cleaned up the uranium using their process, put that in there, and it demonstrated, although I had loaded the uranium at the beginning there, none of it came through the process. And then there's another one that I started that I got mixed up with in here.
Well, so that is the one of the two projects that you worked on directly.
Yeah, I was responsible for it.
And the second one now is...
the second one was night. Oh, I got to tell you something.
Okay.
The capture power of an element was measured in barns, as in barn door, and that measurement hadn't really. That was a new kind of measurement. So the physicists were thinking like physicists and thinking barn doors. So the measure of the capture power was barns. Anyway, the other thing I did was they needed to determine that there wasn't any nitrogen in the product. Nitrogen had a high neutron capture. And so I devised a program where I took a few, considerably less than a gram of uranium, and I could detect nitrogen in it by a chemical process. It was a titration problem where I reduced the nitrogen to the alkaline form, ammonia, and then I titrate the nitrogen in that, treating it as a base. The only thing I added to, I think, what might be considered a routine analysis was that I did it with a very small amount of material. And on the day that they brought it to my lab, it came by guard, packing gun, and staying at the door like this all the time that I was doing the analysis. And nobody could come in and nobody could get out. And then I cleaned up all the stuff, and he took it back for purification in their process.
So by cleaning it up, you removed the nitrogen.
Yeah, see, I had chemicals in with it that needed to come out. It was a simple thing because they just, the purification process of the uranium for to deliver to to Los Alamos was an interesting process where uranium nitrate was soluble in ether. And so they would make a solution nearly saturated with copper nitrate. So all the uranium is in the nitrate form, and then they would extract it with the ether in several loads until none came out, of course. And then all they had to do was evaporate the ether away, and they had the nitrate, which they could just then heat, and it would convert to the oxide, the uranium trioxide.
Were these two experiments analysis done in the R&D facility of
Yes.
Y12 at Oak Ridge?
Oh yes, I had an office. I was the first one there, so I had an office next to Herb's, and right across the hall from that, I had my own laboratory. So anything I was asked to do that required a laboratory, I did there.
Gordon, would you please discuss some of the colleagues that you worked with at Oak Ridge, at UC Davis or Berkeley?
I'll be glad to. The first one I got here is Abe DeHaan, and I think that's significant because Abe is responsible for getting me into the program. He was, I think he probably graduated the same time as I did, which was that June in
1942.
42, yeah. He'd been a friend for a long time, and I seem to have known him more than I can remember at the university, maybe in lab or something. But once we got once we got to Oak Ridge, I didn't see him hardly ever. I just never crossed paths, and I found that kind of interesting. That I just, it's like I was swept off in another direction. But okay, the next name you got here is Bob Schmidt. I think Bob was a physicist. He wasn't much of a chemist, but he sure knew a lot about vacuum systems. And as I've told you, he designed these silly little vacuum distillation or sublimation devices that I first worked on. It was he had some kind of special concept there. It was silly, but I saw him a lot. As a matter of fact, he suggested, that I be sent here or there to do some jobs.
Was this while you were at Oak Ridge?
This is seeing him at Oak Ridge. He, like the other guys, didn't show up until a long time after John and I got there. Anyway, Bob remained a good friend throughout, and he seemed to have access to the decision makers on there in the chemistry. And I remember he designed the vacuum systems that they used in production. The uranium was made by the Eastman Kodak boys by heating the oxide in a pressure tank with carbon tetrachloride, and you get the uranium chloride all right, but it's sloppy. And in order to clean it up so that it would evaporate right in a vacuum and get all the gassy stuff out of it, they distilled it, they sublimed it, the way we did at Berkeley in the physics lab, but in much larger quantities, more along the lines of the one that Bob and I were fooling with. There, I told you about the dry room.
Yes.
Anyway, he was kind of I think was go-to guy for one of the big offices, and I remember jumping ahead of myself toward the end of the war. I mean, toward the end of the war, they were generating enough U-235 makeup. That is, not the product, but after the first process, they had a certain enrichment, and it was precious, but it was bulky also. He designed, and he went to the big shots, and he said, "Look, we're going to have to do something about purifying the enriched material." And so he argued that they needed a building, so they started designing a building. And I worked on that. That was one of my but he was a mover shaker kind of guy, but I don't think he was really attached. He probably was attached to the main guys, the big shot, like I was attached to the guy who was later attached to in a go-to guy on the chemistry group. So he is a great guy. He had a BS just like me. As a matter of fact, all of us, except for the jazzy ones that came from down from Eastman Kodak when they brought all their guys down. He's a smart guy. And John Morfitt was my buddy and lived with me in a house with about 4 other guys, three were Eastman, 3 were Berkeley. House where we did our own housekeeping and cooking and so on. Now, I got to tell you about John. All the way, he had this, hold this a minute, he had this crazy thing about all the way across the nation on my dashboard. That kind of stuff.
That was John.
Yeah, I learned it from him. And he was also one of the guys in our chess group. We had some of us got together, and about once a week we would get together and play Kriegspiel chess.
How many on that list played chess with you?
Well, there's just John and Dr. Jenkins. Dr. Jenkins was my physics teacher at Berkeley and a really good friend.
Did you buy bourbon for him once?
What?
Did you buy bourbon?
No, I bought rum.
Rum?
we couldn't buy liquor anywhere in Tennessee. It was dry, of course. So occasionally we'd drive down into Georgia, and just over the border, we'd buy our booze and come home. Well, when I went down there, I think I liked gin or something. They didn't have any gin, so I brought back rum, and it's rum I had no taste for, but Herb Jenkins did like it, and I think he's eventually the only one that drank up that bottle of rum. He's a really good guy. And while we're on it, I'd like to tell a story.
Okay. Tell a story.
Yeah.
But it's Dr. Francis Jenkins. You called him Herb. There's Dr. Herb Young and Francis Jenkins.
I called him?
You called him Herb, but I know you know better. Dr. Jenkins was your chess partner.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I did say that. Yeah.
That's okay. Just clarify it is all.
No.
Tell your story.
Well, when we were playing chess, we didn't talk a lot about business, but sometimes it would come up, a problem would come up that somebody didn't understand or something. We get into discussion. And that was, I know we had quite a discussion on spies, and we knew that there were an awful lot of them around. And just ask everybody. The boss, not the boss, but the leader, the technical leader at Davis, I think was just such a person. And he's the one that got that guy fired for talking in the hallway. Anyway, Jenkins was really good, and I never knew where he was working there. He must have been going back and forth to the University of there at Berkeley, because sometimes he was there and sometimes he wasn't. And in the latter part of the war, he wasn't. But when he was there, he was. He was telling them about a problem that had shown up in the calutrons. They know how much material that collects in the collector box. They call it the sump or something. Physicists talking, and I understood why I had been asked to set up an analytical laboratory in the basement of the production of the Calutron building, 9202 or something like that, one. And they were ripping out everything in there, and I knew they were looking for the enriched uranium, because they knew how much they should have due to the current reaching the box, but it just wasn't there. And my laboratory was helping them do this research. Anyway, I knew that there was this thing, and then it stopped. And, well, that's it. But they kept the laboratory there. I wasn't there then, but they kept the laboratory there. At the chess game, he said, he'd tell this story. Okay.
That's okay,
He told this story about they had just invented a new a sump to improve the process. And to improve the process was not to let this stuff get away, because when the ion beam comes over there, it's coming in at a few hundred volts, you know, and when it 1,000 volts, but when it loses its charge, hitting the inside this sump, it's so energetic that some of it pops out of the hole that it came in. And it's more than likely to do that, considering that it has so much energy that it can unmelt itself. Yes. Anyway, so they that was the beginning of the story. The story was that they had changed the sump, and they call it the sump with a bump dump. And that told me more than just that the efficiency went up. It told me what I was doing, what they were doing when they were looking for the uranium. And things like that would come out. They wouldn't give the thing away, but I could put things away with what I knew, and I had a great picture of what was going on. Anyway, that's how he wanted to be that was my hero. That's Dr. Jenkins. He is my physics teacher. I say that over and over again.
That's okay. You liked him a lot.
I did. Now, Ed Wagner worked with me at Davis, and he was kind of my buddy there. He had a car there. So we got around. We'd go play badminton with the girls at night, after work. One Christmas, he had something going, and he had a friend with a house, and the friend was away. So at Christmas, we had a turkey. I went in the morning and I started the turkey baking. He tended to his project, checking in on it, working with it, and then at later in the morning, he came to work. Oh no, I went and took care of his stuff, and he stayed with the turkey. And then afterwards, we ate the whole damn turkey, with 3 bottles of champagne. Yes. And anyway, whenever he needed to get around, I borrowed his car for dates and things, you know. A nice lady friend there. But he invented this thing that would trickle uranium through there.
And that you spoke
that
about
was the
earlier.
thing with a little clicker knocker on the glass to keep it moving. He continued to work on that, and it puzzled me until just recently I began to put some more things together while I'm thinking, and they were using that process to chlorinate the oxide from the calutrons, to make the chloride to go into the beta calutrons. And I just wonder why I was so slow to catch up on that, because he kept working on that the whole time I was there.
Talk about Herb Young. And
Herb Young was, of course, my boss at R&D, and I think he pulled me back from other jobs that I had because they needed somebody in the head of the chemistry department. He was over all of the purification and also I think the assay department where they determined the purity of the 235. And so I get shuffled around. I got jobs like they needed somebody to check drawings for beta production buildings because they were doing it laboratory-wise, and they were they're looking to move it into a higher production mode, and that called for a new building. Those vacuum chambers that I mentioned, Bob Schmidt's stuff, and also the chemical purification was all Pyrex tubing and really a big chemistry building.
You had an incident where the metal arches in your shoes.
Well, one of the jobs that I had, Herb would send me out on these jobs, took me to, it was necessary for me to climb up on top of one of these calutrons. Well, calutrons had magnets that were, I'd say, I'm just thinking off from the 10 feet high, no, 8 feet high, and I would say about maybe 6 feet deep. That's a lot of magnet. Well, they had you couldn't use metallic tools around that, so everything in there was bronze. Everything pliers, wrenches, everything, all tools were bronze. And so because it's a powerful magnetic field, 5,000 Gauss, this is a lot, maybe 5, something. Anyway, that's the way Herb gave me a job, I think, which meant I had to go up on top of one of these magnets and check something. Well, I got a ladder. I took everything out of my trousers. I didn't wear glasses then, so I didn't have to leave those behind. And I got up on top of this thing, and when I stepped down in the magnet area, my foot was to one side. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And explain why your foot moved to one side.
And the reason was that I had an arch support with a steel face, a brace in it, a steel forming. I'm glad it didn't recognize a steel when it sees it. Me. Well, that was a big. Well, anyway.
Let's cut this for. I think we may be wrapping this up for today.